let me start off with a question, right? So why do we as a whole society in general, considering like finding your like other side as a type of say like success, and while being single is often seen as a type of problem that should be solved, right? So the motion before us today, it asks us to consider that as parents, we should actively raise our children to prefer being single. And on the proposition side, we believe that this isn't about forcing children to be like lonely, but about equipping them with like this type of mindset so that when they actually do choose, if they choose to go into a romantic relationships, it becomes like an addition and it's actually a healthy relationship instead of being like a prerequisite of like a good relationship. So today, as the first speaker of proposition, I'll be presenting like our first two arguments. So firstly, about how it protects like the children's sense of like self-worth, and secondly, how it fosters genuine and healthy relationships. So firstly, we believe that raising a child to prefer being single, it protects their self-worth, and it also like in to some extent it shields them from like some type of harmful social pressures. So first, like in the status quo, right? Like our society, it's built with this type of narrative that it sees this type of romantic partner as some type of like prize and like being single as like lacking something. And we are also like being told and we're sold this type of message in movies and like advertising and even in like subtle and like harmless like comments from family and friends, right? And by actively like countering this type of narrative through supporting this motion, so let me tell you how it helps protect our children. So 3 points. Firstly, it breaks this type of like link and label between like being single and being like an outcast and being like a failure, right? So like, from a young age, children they are shown and have the idea that like their type of worth is tied to how much they are liked by others, and they want to strive for the goodwill and they want to get noticed by others. But this instead it can lead to like anxiety, it leads to like low self-esteem, and it also leads to like a willingness to settle for anyone and to settle for like unhealthy relationships just to have a relationship in the first place. So by teaching them to actually prefer and value like their own company, like we break this type of like toxic mindset, and we are telling them that like their value isn't defined by how others see them, but like they are like perfect as they are. And secondly, it also like builds like this type of like resilience against like peer pressure and also societal like expectations, because like teenage and like young adult years, like say I don't know, like 18 to 25 years old, it's also like full of pressure to be in a relationship because they see their friends going out with their boyfriends, they see some even getting married, and they feel the need to find somebody just to be included in that type of friend group. And this pressure, it can lead to like rush decisions, it can lead to like emotional distress, and also like a feeling of exclusion. And a child who is actually raised with this type of positive view of being single, they would be able to like think about how like they are good as their own and they don't need a partner, they don't need a boyfriend to be worthy, right? And then they are far less likely as well to be like swayed by the influence of other people around them, or to like just compromise or just to give up their own personal values just to fit in. And thirdly, this type of parenting, it also like models this independence, because like the ultimate gift, I think we can agree on this, a parent can actually give their child is the ability to be independent and succeed on their own. And a preference for singlehood as a default lifestyle, like as stated in the info site, it fosters crucial life skills like financial independence, like emotional regulation when they're sad, and also the ability to be content by themselves. And by supporting this motion, we are raising a child who can actually solve challenges, overcome challenges by themselves, and not by like depending by leaning on another person to do that for them. And secondly,
Point
second
of
argument, like
information.
this type of parenting, what? PI?
Sorry, point of yeah, POI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So you've stated that by this sort of like allowing children to adopt a single mindset, it allows them to be more like sort of independent by working by themselves. But how would you respond to by saying what happens if they aren't independent and they have nobody else to rely on in the absence of these relationships?
Well, we believe that in if like because we believe that like say this is a relationship, right? They have to be like able to like like this type of parenting, it does just teach them to be like independent. And if they aren't, and if they actually do depend on the other person to like sustain their relation, to sustain their independence, then we believe that like if the other person like say breaks up with them, then the like harms of it would be even worse than them not being independent in the first place. Because it would mean that they will completely, number one, heartbreak, and number two, they will be like suddenly like on their own and they will have nobody to like help them. Does that answer it? Like, I'm just gonna move on. Okay, sorry. So, like, secondly, the parenting approach fosters like genuine and also fulfilling relationships that are built on choice and not necessity. Because, like, this might seem like a type of like contradictory, but teaching a child to actually prefer being single is the best way to ensure that they have healthy relationships. Because first, it removes like this type of desperation for like and the fear of being alone. And the most common reason that people actually stay in bad relationships in the first place is because of the fear of being single. And if we remove that fear by like normalizing and preferring being single, even we like remove that desperation, we remove that need to be in a relationship, and people won't be driven by this type of like fear of missing out on a like relationship or go into a relationship just to like escape this type of loneliness. And secondly, it also sets like a higher standard for what a relationship should be like. Because if a relationship is not seen as a requirement, then it's like this person, they must earn their value, they must earn their place in like another person's life, right? Like, and by preferring like this type of single this like we teach like children to actually choose partners who actually genuinely add value, who will like actually genuinely love them, and
Oh,
rather
point
than
of
those who
information.
just simply what POI rejected what. Oh, okay. I'm just gonna um and rather than those who just like simply feel like this type of desperation, right? And they will seek partners who actually like uplift them, who like respect them, and also like share their same values. So, Judge, like in conclusion, the opposition they will show you this type of like bleak, this type of solitary and like nobody to care for you future, right? But that is untrue because we are not proposing isolation. We are proposing this type of like independence, and it's about protecting their self-worth from a society that tells them they are incomplete without a partner. And for all these reasons, proposition. Thank you.
Before going to my substantive, right, there are some rebuttals I'd like to point out. Firstly, they said that this fosters, like, if parents were to influence this, right, it fosters genuine relationships. This just really isn't true, as these people, these children, will be influenced by their parents to be single. They just won't go into relationships at all. We believe they're just far worse than them being in a relationship, right? Even if those relationships are like necessarily bad or might not be as good, because the vast majority of them will have these genuine and good relationships. Secondly, they also said that society as of now, right? If they're single, right, you're lacking something, and like in society, they think it's better to be like to be in a relationship, and this is just very true. This is true due to humans as a species being very social, and so many people do need someone to talk to and confide to. Meaning, regardless of what, like anything happens, right? Humans as a whole will still try to find relationships, right? Even if it's not like these romantic relationships, they will still try to seek out like friendships and stuff. Right. They also say like the children's worth is like tied to how much they are liked by others. And so due to that, they're willing to get into these relationships just to like have a sense of like self-worth, for instance. Um, this is just not really true, as I feel like these children are able to understand that these relationships like last their whole life, right? These relationships are pretty important. You're making these relationships, and also this really just isn't related to only these relationships, right? It isn't only about this. Right, there are just so many other ways for those children to be liked by others, right? Either through friendships and stuff. So they will also just seek out those instead, rather than just going to a relationship straight away. Also, they also say that they'll be like pressured into being in a relationship, right? As they'll be far less due to like others swaying them. However, like regardless in both worlds, they're still being swayed by people, right? In our world, they're being swayed by like their friends, right? But in their world, they're being swayed by their parents to stay single. So regardless, they're being swayed. So it doesn't really matter, I think. And in addition, they also said that these people in relationships are independent and are dependent on others. But I think humans are always like dependent on others to a certain degree, either like regardless of relationship, either just through friends or parents, but also on both sides. These parents, well, also like these people, right? These people are just independent fundamentally, right? They have a degree of independence because this is why we have like schools and parents to teach us what we can do by ourselves and be independent. They've also finally stated there's like the fear of missing out, as these friends their friends will have relationships, and so they'll rush into it and get into bad relationships. This really won't happen and also because before these people date or actually get into relationships, right, they will spend time to get to know them well, and they'll like understand through these experiences if the other person actually likes them, and if they're like genuinely a good person, and if they respect them. And so now onto my substantive. Firstly, onto some characterization. Three pieces here. Firstly, these parents weren't actually like in our world, parents won't actually say anything to them or influence them about their choice of being single or not. Right? Meaning this choice is completely up to the child themselves to see if they enjoy being married or not. And secondly, these parents will still, however, influence them accidentally, right? For example, in day-to-day life, they see their parents looking after them or looking after their siblings. I think that it seems pretty fun. They might want to be like married when they grow up. That is still a thing, but the parents won't try to like directly impact them, influence them. And thirdly, children just as a whole are very like vulnerable stakeholders in this debate. They're very malleable and very easily influenced by parents and by the things around them. All right, so now onto my substantive. Firstly, my first point is on principle. I feel like these children have a freedom of choice, right? They're like heavily influenced from birth, and so in their world, and so whilst they aren't like directly undermining their choice, they're still heavily hindering their development of perspectives, right? And I feel like children should be allowed to have their own freedom of choice as long as it's not directly like hurting them, right? Opposition might try to say that children already don't have a freedom of choice because parents influence them, either like forcing them to go to school and stuff. However, this is because school, like if they don't go to school, right, it directly negatively impacts them. However, with like relationships, it just doesn't. So we believe that children should have this freedom of speech. So it's freedom of choice. Right. And also, like, these people, right, they will just be heavily influenced by their parents, right? A great example would be children who are raised in a Christian household will be more likely to adopt Christian ideologies, right? Due to their parents constantly pushing them, making them go to church and stuff, right? And so all of these ideologies, right? All of these households who have these ideologies are typically very polarized households, right? A great example would be like Christianity, right? Those people who are Christian, they probably won't grow up, like their kids probably won't grow up to be like Islamic or like Buddhist. They won't really like study those religions because like from birth, basically, they've been told that like Christian is like the best one, right? They've been told that from birth, so they just won't choose any other one. They won't even like try it. They won't even like think about themselves. They won't be able to form their own perspectives on this. Secondly, if we do prefer a house to raise them to be single, right? These households are more likely to be way more extreme and really imposed into your life. And they want to make sure that you're like following in their footsteps and listening to them. For example, they will like look through your messages or just generally be more imposed in your life to make sure that like you're staying single, for instance, or like you're following their religion. And even if not all households are like this, right? At least some proportion of them will be. And so these households are very important. And so we shouldn't really allow this much harm to the child, right? Next, on to practicals. Due to this, there's just more polarized society as a whole. As these people, they're less willing to go into relationships. They're more segregated, more polarized due to this lack of relationships. Right? So mechanism, how will this work, right? Is if these people don't get into these relationships, right, there's just less chance to talk to interact with the opposite gender and also other people to this certain level. Because if you're in a relationship with someone, right, you are like really trusting them. You trust them a lot. So you're willing to be able to talk to them and be able to confide with them about things that you wouldn't really talk to anyone else about. And so this just creates this is more segregated, as you won't really be able to have this like conversation with anyone else, meaning that like as a whole, society just has less relationship with other people and can't really have this level of trust with others. It just makes it extremely segregated and more polarized. In addition, like if we were, another point is that like there's just conflicting perspectives, right? And this undermines parental trust and reliance, and this is just exacerbated on the proposition side compared to ours. As already many households have this issue, where if someone, like a great example would be if someone was to come out as, for instance, gay, but their parents don't really accept of it, right? It leads to them being separated, and their parents, like their trust in their parents is just completely gone, right? They can't really talk to their parents, they can't really confide about it, and this just really undermines the parental trust, right? And reliance, as they realize they can't really talk to their parents about it, they're like separated from them. And this is exacerbated on the proposition side compared to ours, as on their side, since parents tell their children or try and influence them to be single, right? Many children will become scared to talk to their parents about it due to having different opinions. And so this will just lead to a lot of conflict between the parent and kids, just leads to no support and destroys trust and reliance on parents, which is really negative. So with that, I'm proud to oppose.
Our opponents are talking about that children are never going to have any kind of interactions with their other genders because of that their planet with thought of being single is actually beneficial. Well, we never tell kids to actually avoid all romantic relationships. Our core point is that being single itself can carry good and clear real benefits. Well, children, they have parents, right? And they grow up like after their parents' own bond. It might be positive or negative. So at least they can build a like good perspective toward love on what healthy romance should actually be. And they can recognize like the joy that a loving partner can actually bring, or if their parents aren't really along with each other, they can still see that what are actually kind of like romance that they actually want, or is it even beneficial, or is it even going to bring them any kind of like joy. So they now are fully understand about how kind of like rewarding or complete life that they can actually stay alone, and
Point of
that a
information.
partner is not that necessary. So well, as I say, the society are pushing a lot of people into like relationships, even though it might be hurtful. So only because they cannot stand on being on their own, they are planning with the stereotypes that someone needs a partner to have a pretty meaningful life. So no personal freedom, and they want to actually rely on someone others to actually be happy. So if they ever choose to date later, it will comes to a true affection for like someone others, and they are still isn't like thinking much about themselves. They are not really clear about what they actually need. So being single acts as their actually steady beneficial life for like going onward, and
Point of
romance is
information.
only a kind of like optional choice for them, instead of being someone who can actually they can live well when they're single, and the other one is just a choice and that not that necessary. And first, let me say about some kind of like ways that that their parents might actually plant these minds into their children that single is sure beneficial. First is that they the parents will like they will show that they have some kind of like proper and own loving relationships at their own home, so these children are able to see what are actually the like positive relationship, and in a very kind of like reasonable way. And the parents will actually chat with their kids about how great it
Point of
is
information.
actually being single. Wait, not now. And that you can be like when you're alone, you can do your own hobbies. You don't need to rely on someone else to actually impact your choice and your all of your movements. And also, these parents are never going to push and waiting for their children to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Well, if a family members kept asking them and pushing them toward dating with someone at a appropriate age, well, will the children actually be comfortable with that? Parents will like par- parents in our like perspective is that they won't really push them, and there's actually no hurry, and the parents will tell the kids one person is
Point of
able
information.
and enough to live a pretty stable life. And so um we will let our children to focus on what the need of themselves. So if the kids feel sad about being single, parents will try to actually cheer them up and tell them that single days are precious and full of different opportunities that you can really have when there is a partner that are actually restricting some of your movements and choices. So now starting on with my arguments. First, well, my a partner also says that society now is pushing a lot of people to date in an appropriate age, and planting the thought that a partner is necessary for you to live a meaningful life. And parents, well, they should choose to raise their children to see single life as a normal choice. Like, well, now
Point of information.
not relatives and classmates, and even like a lot of people online are talking about that a lover is able for you to give you a kind of like appropriate choice. And well, all of these like kind of thoughts and opinions makes parents feel that they have to push their kids to grow up and into some kind of like nonstop romance. So they worry about being judged by other relatives and others that are saying that why isn't your kid still getting a partner? They end up even fighting with their kids over what are actually is it actually the time, or even like are they even like dating with the same the one that even met their um appropriate sort of a partner? So after all, they will want to do what the society really wants them to fit. If we raise the children well, we won't just like they won't be stressed out when they see others dating, and they will take the time as who and they think of the core of romance. They're never in a hurry. Like they can't stop forcing their kid into a rush into all these relationships and skip all those like tense family arguments around who, or is it appropriate to have a partner right now because of the social pressure, and parents get to avoid all of these endless stress from the society's push for their children to date. And also, well, we know that people now, after they have like when their love don't really work out, they will have a huge emotional breakdowns. So like breakups brings a lot of heartbreaking sadness, right? But
Point of
people who
information.
think uh okay, people who think that who thinks that single life is not a big deal won't really feel that terrible. They will still even gain some confidence over a satisfying life that they can enjoy after being single. Like someone who had a breakdown, they won't be staying in their locking themselves in their rooms, crying their heads off, but still they will try to have a better single life. So they can believe that love still exists in the future, but first they will consider their own feelings and if they're ready or not, or they won't be destroyed when one relationship ends. So if we put all of my points together, these lessons teach like kids to balance truths about romance, love that can bring a lot of joy, but a partner is never ever necessary to give
Right.
themselves a very worthy life. So this healthy view of romance keeps children to stay mentally stable and like self-respecting, and also cutting down the like
Right.
edges of people towards love. So thanks.
So before I begin my speech, I'd first like to point out a few major flaws the opposition have made in their case. So that first speaker, they come up with this push that, being single protects their child's self-worth and to some extent shields them from these harmful social pressures. But again, we sort of see this symmetrically. So on our side, as long as your parents love you unconditionally and support you, you're going to have this self-worth that's being protected, again, that they're claiming is on their side. And again, they say, to respond to the it shields them from harmful social pressures, humans are biologically wired, like seek out others and care what others think about them. So like no matter what, whether you feel self-worth or not, you're still gonna feel, social pressure. Others who claim that raising them to be single, that there's this label in society that being single is really bad, and raising them as single again, breaks this label, makes them feel good about themselves. But no, again, as their peers are still going to pressure them, and to a certain extent, let's say in your 20s, it's peer pressure and your pressure from your friends. They're gonna have more influence on you than your parents saying you should be single, is going to have on you, and you're still gonna feel like a social pressure. And again, teaching them to be single, this toxic mindset is broken, and they feel they're worth it and they value themselves. But this is symmetrical on that outside, as if you have good parents that teach you, love you unconditionally, and support you, you're going to believe you're worth it. Then they say it gives you resilience against peer pressure, and the children who are raised with this positive view feel they are fine on their own. Again, I just want to say, one main answer to this, as humans are biologically, we're wired to want to be loved, to care what others think about them, and no matter what you do, you're still gonna, feel this peer pressure, you're still gonna, want to have friends, want to be around others, want people to like you, want people to love you, so on and so forth. And then preference for singlehood, they say, helps you be independent, emotional regulators, and it'll be a better problem solver. But, opposition haven't proven this. And again, on our side, independence, emotional regulation, taught by parents, they're taught by schools, they're going to actually happen on the status quo and on their side. So it's symmetrical. And for problem solving, if anything, it should be a better problem solver if you're in a relationship. Because there's problems that appear in relationships compared, let's say, in singlehood. Because you're with another person. That means you have to problem solve on a daily basis. You have to adapt continuously. And this benefit of being a better problem solver is actually, just on our side rather than theirs. They say teaching a child to be single ensures, they have healthy relationships. They're gonna have a high standard of what a relationship should be, and they're gonna teach them to choose good partners. But actually, they're not gonna be. They're being taught to be single. They're taught not to actually have partners. And they said again, the parents are gonna actually demonstrate what a good relationship is. But again, most let's say parents, they're not actually have like a super loving relationship. So actually, the best demonstrator. And that means these kids are taught to be single, even when they decide they don't want to be single. They're actually not gonna have this idea of what a good partner is, what they should look for in a partner. They say people won't be driven by fear of missing out. And so as a result, if they go into a bad relationship, they would stay in it because they won't have this fear of being alone, being single. And yes, maybe they won't have this fear of being single, but they're going to have this fear of missing out and actually want to not be single and still going to try and find relationships on. Because this fear of missing out is ingrained in people, as already proven. This really high peer pressure is still constant. And despite, what parents do, this peer pressure is actually going to have a higher effect. Let's say when they're actually at dating age, what their peers think of them, it's actually going to matter more to them, let's say what their parents think of them. Then at second speaker, they came out and said, they don't actually tell their kids and they're not raising the kids to avoid all romantic relationships. But this notion of, being single and raising kids to be single as the motion dictates, is, the notion of being single, so you're not in a romantic relationship. And instead, they're going to build a good perspective for love and recognize what a healthy relationship. But if they've been taught to be single and not have relationships, how are they actually getting taught to build a good perspective to love and recognize what a healthy relationship is? I also said parents are going to chat their kids about how great it is being single and how good it is to be alone. This actually contradicts their first point, how they're not telling kids to avoid all relationships. When the parents are literally, as I've claimed, parents are going to, explain to the kids that being alone is okay, being alone is fine, in comparison to saying that they're raising the kids also to have healthy relationships. They said family members, won't push them to date, they won't have this, pressure from their family. But it's also the same, let's say, on their side and our side, it's symmetrical. Yes, in the status quo, family members, let's say, if they push them to date, but on their side, it says only parents want them to be single. So not their uncles, their cousins, their aunts, their brothers, their sisters, whatever. These people are still going to, push them to be, let's say, if it's the same status quo, they're still going to push them, to date. They're going to go, where's your partner, so on. I said partners restrict your choices, therefore being single is also better. It's actually being helpful for these, these kids who are obviously going to grow up. But again, there's very few tiny minority of people are these controlling, and vast majority of relationships actually really healthy and really beneficial for people. So kids are going to be pressured. Kids won't feel social pressure and they won't feel heartbreak. But they're still going to feel social pressure, obviously. As already proven, you're still going to have, peer pressure actually more effective. Let's say, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40. You're going to have, peer pressure going to have a more effective than what your family say, your parents say to you. And they say they won't feel heartbreak. But again, if you invest enough in a relationship, despite what you think being single is good, you're still going to feel this emotion, this heartbreak if you invest enough into a relationship. So now for my substantive. So I believe that in the opposition's world, we can see more loneliness, more sadness, more detrimental negative health, but mental health, negative health like harms, and also more suicide. So obviously relationships have, been shown and proven scientifically to be beneficial to people. It makes people happier, less lonely, especially when they're feeling loved. And humans, they're naturally social creatures. They seek out others for their own mental health. And humans, they inherently want to be loved. And this is something that, these romantic relationships provide. Also, we see like leading causes of suicide are loneliness, this lack of relationships, this feeling, you're unwanted or needed or loved, that really affects someone, right? But if you raise kids, prefer being single, this vast portion of the generation, this next generation, they're going to be single. They're going to forego relationships. They're not going to have this romantic relationship, this romantic partner, and so on. And this lack of relationships means, they're going to be less likely to be happy, more likely to be lonely. They feel they aren't loved by someone, they don't have a significant other in their life, right? And so definitely, they're more likely going to be, sad, experience these detrimental mental health effects, such as, depression, sadness, suicidal thoughts, things like that. And as a result, they're going to be more likely to commit suicide, or at least, experience some sort of decrease to their mental health and some sort of detrimental effect as a result, such as depression. And cats, dogs, such as animals or friends, don't have the same impact as our romantic. Yes, your friends, they like you, they may love you to an extent, but they don't love you the same as say your significant other does, right? Which obviously you will not have if you're single in this opposition's world. And so as an impact, we see, more people, they're going to be sad, depressed, lonely, experiencing negative mental health effects. People are more likely to commit suicide as they're lonely, they don't have this relationship, they don't feel they're loved or wanted. We're also going to see a declining birth rate. There's less people in relationships, less people having kids. This declining birth rate is obviously bad for society in future, as less people working, aging, there's also going to be an aging population, and there's also going to be less people to take care of old people as well. And as more people are, depressed, lonely, you're going to be less productive, less likely to do work, more likely to stay at home, and less likely to do recreational activities, such as eating out, playing sport, going to the movies, utilizing all these recreational services we have currently. And as well as this, we can see economic downturns. People aren't utilizing, these wants we see, and it's going to be less productivity, so less work being done. Obviously, we see, and as a result, it's obviously bad. As number one, these impacts are bad because we value human life very highly in society. So, more suicide is a very bad thing and tangible harm. And this aging population means you're going to see less economic activity and lower quality of life, not only for older people, as there are less people to provide this quality of life, not aged care centers, not as many people to take care of them, but the lower economic activity means more unemployment and lower quality of life for more people, which is significant tangible harm. Because, they don't have jobs, they don't have money to spend for like essentials and necessities and also wants. And therefore, the status quo is significantly better in comparison to opposition's world, where there's these much greater tangible harms. Thank you. I'm proud to oppose.
Throughout this whole entire debate,
the opposition side seems to not understand 2 points that our side has stated. First of all, they believe that kids will always want to marry, as they've stated in like their first speaker's speech, that trust will be broken between adults and kids because the adults are gonna force them to be single on our side while the kids want to be married. But that's not the case because they do not explain why kids will always want to be married, and that is just extreme. And second of all, we are saying that parents are influencing the kids to be single, but it's the children's like decision. It's their final decision. Like parents cannot make decisions for kids, and it's up to the children while if they want to marry or not. But the parents are heavily influencing that. So what we're saying is that teaching them to be single provides a safety net for these children because if they experience a breakup, like if they chose to date at last, if they experience a breakup or if they experience something traumatic
Information.
relating to regarding to like relationships, they will know how to deal with it and they wouldn't feel that sad and they would be acknowledging that they are individual and they have to like and they are worth themselves like no matter what other people think of them. So the first clash of this entire debate is whether children will actually have a good social life or not. So on our side, we believe yes. So firstly, it shields them from social pressure. So like both sides are agreeing with this. So basically this society forces like young people nowadays to marry because they want them to have a family and they want them to have kids. And so on our side, the parents are teaching, like the parents are the children's like guardian and they're the ones that they're closest in life. So when a trusted adult tells them single is fine, you don't have to be ashamed of being single, or like if when people tell you to marry, you don't have to marry. They have like a safe kind of feeling inside them, and then it shields them from the social pressure, as our first speaker has stated. And secondly, they don't date for the sake of dating, which means that they would less likely to get into toxic relationships. And this happens because
Information.
yes.
So previously in your clarification, you said that children have like a choice to be like single relationship, not parents. But how would you respond to by saying that these children, their perspectives and their choices are shaped by their environment from their parents, and therefore it kind of undermines their choice based off this, ideology imposed onto them?
Yes, we agree that parents have most of the control or like influence on children, but sometimes children can be rebellious, and they could have different opinions. Like your first speaker has stated sometime that parents and children might have conflicts because of opposing like opinions, and the children's actions are caused by the children. And so if they choose to do something, sometimes their parents can't stop them, especially at such a young age of like young adult. And moving back, so people don't date for the sake of dating. And thirdly, they wouldn't be that much influenced by peer pressure in like the aspect of dating. And fourthly, it will foster healthy relationships because they know what's good for them and they know that it is okay to not be in a relationship. While the opposition side believes that children will not have a good social life because firstly, parents won't be able to influence the children to be single, which means that they believe that on our side, like the parents or children will have conflict because like the trust will be broken because parents want their child to be single while the children wants to be married. And they also think that like parents cannot influence the child enough, which is very contradictory to the POI their speaker has just asked. And so I would like to rebut this point for two reasons. So firstly, if parents can't influence their child to be single, they can't influence their child to be married either. So this does not work for both sides of this debate. And so in this case, this debate doesn't even make sense and this motion shouldn't even exist. So this does not, like their claim of saying that parents cannot influence children to be single on our side does not make sense at all. And even if it is true, it is the same for their side. So it's not possible for their side for the parents to influence their children to be married either. And secondly, this claim saying that trust in parents will be gone because the children will have conflict and be scared to talk to their parents, as their first speaker has mentioned, is wrong, because this assumes that parents and children will always be in disagreement, which is extreme, and that the trust will be broken just because of marriage. So it's also assuming that the children will always support marriage on our side, and the parents will always support being single on their side. But this is not true, because first of all, marriage has a lot of it requires a lot of money to date someone, to buy presents for them. It requires a lot of time and commitment, which not all people want to do. And also holding a wedding is also really expensive. And marriage can also have, even if it's true that this trust will be broken, it's same on their side, because even if the children and the parents, both of them want to be married, both of them wants the child to be married, but they disagree on who the child should be married to, and that also causes a lot of disagreement and even breaking apart of the family. And so we win this clash because firstly, their case is really, really extreme. Like I've mentioned before, they expect children to always want to be married, and they also expect they also think that having not being in a relationship means that their children will be depressed, and they believe that their children will not be in a lot of friendships with people of the opposite gender, which our second speaker has already proven to not be true. But the thing is, on their side, they could people can even be more depressed and hurt even physically because of physical abuse, domestic abuse, and toxic relationships, and they've never considered that into their perspective. And also addressing the claim about Asian population. First of all, marriage does not equal babies, because when people marry, they don't want babies sometimes because it's painful for the women. And secondly, women need bodily autonomy, which means that women make the final decisions since they gave birth, and many choose not to because of the pain. And thirdly, many don't want babies because of the financial implications. It's so expensive. And for these reasons, we believe that we win this clash and also this debate. Thank you.
This debate boils down into two main questions here. Number one, what is principally better for these children and these parents? And number two, what is practically better for these children, which are the main stakeholders? Now, before I begin on these clashes, I want to make give a few pieces of clarification. So number one, opposition says that our team has falsely assumed that these kids will always want to marry, and says it's really not feasible. I want to quickly clarify that we our team doesn't at all in anywhere say that these kids want to marry, but we say that for the very vulnerable and large stakeholder of those who do want relationships, the vast majority of children who do people who do somewhat want relationships, they are not going to be able to develop these relationships because of this imposed ideology from in their household, where they are very influenced, very easily influenced and very malleable. And now they've also stated that it's a children's choice to be single in a relationship, not parents. I just want to quickly clarify that this isn't really feasible, and the opposition tries to actually mitigate this point by using one of our points in my first speaker, which isn't really mitigates their own sort of point. And also opposition also tries stating that there will be a lack of influence from parents, mitigates both sides, and therefore there's not any motion. I just want to quickly clarify this is not really in the spirit of the debate and kind of irrelevant to the motion in general. But after that, all of that, I want to start my first clash of practical harms. So number one, what does opposition tell you? They have two main pushes here. The first push is that for example, it protects children's sense of self-worth. Now I'm going to give you three responses to this. Number one, some individuals already struggle with valuing their own self-worth with the relationship status, right? But however, this is a really small demographic compared to those who do want to develop relationships, but now they can't, because of this imposed ideology from birth. And the thing is, you have to weigh outside a lot more, because this sort of self-worth can be fixed with maturity, can be fixed with development, can be fixed with interactions, right? But this ideology imposed onto children from birth cannot be fixed as easily, right? And it causes a lot greater harms, because these children are eventually not be able to develop their own relationships. They can't really have their own sort of personal choice in this, because they're very easily influenced from birth, which is why you need to weigh this point a lot more heavily on our side. And now number two, I would like to say, even if you don't believe my previous response or my second response, on a contemporary level, these societal pressures from relationships statuses are not as prominent as we've seen before, right? We see lowering birth rates, we see more independence from individuals, we live in a very progressive society. And now instead, we want to flip this on by saying that this ideology is harming children who would have wanted relationships but now can't develop them because of this ideology. And we should weigh this more heavily again, because this issue is substantially more important, right? And now number three, they've also stated that it creates more independence to for breaks up and heartbreak, and these issues or interactions won't happen. I'll ultimately respond to this by saying that this independence also has a chance to be for example overshot, right? Because from this imposed ideology that you want to be single from in your household when you're being raised up, this independence has the chance to completely prevent the development of any relationship at all, right? Which is completely unresponded to by opposition. And we do agree that independence to some extent is useful, but it's really unfeasible to assume that any individual is independent in every way. And therefore, without these sort of romantic relationships, right, there lacks an adequate figure to mitigate the harms of this dependence, right? And you can't just assume by saying, oh, you can talk to your parents, you can talk to your friends, because a lot of these parents and friends, right, as figures, they're not the same as, for example, potential romantic figures or, for example, like potential partners, right? And you can't necessarily connect with them on the same way and rely with them on the same way, which is why we actually proved that independence is going to be more like, harmed in opposition's world. Now, moving on to the second push, they said that it fosters a positive relationship by allowing individuals to be more careful in selecting their individuals for the relationship and overall giving them a better social life. Now, I'm going to give you 4 responses to this. Number 1, positive relationships, or with like selecting better individuals for relationships, might not even occur because they haven't responded to how by saying that with this ideology from raising from with this ideology of being single from when children are being raised, like they don't really respond to this by explaining how people are still going to be able to develop relationships, given that we've been consistently telling you that because of this ideology, these children are not going to be able to, even if they still can develop relationships, the chance for them to develop relationships and the initiative for them to develop relationships are going to be significantly smaller, right? They're not going to be able to have as big of a chance compared to if they have this ideology imposed on them from birth. And as a result, it's quite blatant that this sort of point, for example, on positive relationships isn't really going to be existing in the first case, because there probably won't be a lot of relationships going on in the world where we are imposing this ideology on opposition's case. And now, number 2, even if you don't believe this, opposition also try to say that people are going to rush into relationships. However, I want to say that this isn't really feasible if someone doesn't like each other, right? A lot of individuals aren't going to just get into a relationship because they don't with someone they don't like, purely because they want to, escape this sort of peer pressure and peer pressure and sort of societal expectations. And even if they do, I want to say that the harm of these are very low, should be weighed very lightly, because in these relationships where you do get in without any sort of long-lasting intentions or long-term intentions, right? These are going to be very temporary. They're not going to be very they're not going to be very harmful, right? They're going to be really temporary. They're going to be really volatile because these relationships are not sustainable. And now, number 3, I just want to point out again that missing out on societal pressures and fear of missing out is not as big of a harm compared to not having relationships in general, right? Because these fear of missing out and societal pressures can be mitigated through just developing as an individual and becoming more mature. But as I've already stated again, having this ideology given from you from birth or from the household you were raised in, from the very style of your life, by saying you should stay single, that's completely harder ideology, right? For example, if you're raised in a Christian household and you were raised up with Christianity, it's a lot harder to try and get you to diverge from Christianity, even if you do, right? Because a lot of individuals, if they have an ideology from when they're the most vulnerable time in their life, then they're probably going to hold on to that ideology, even if a very small percentage of those people actually do let it go, right? The vast majority of people who do live in these households are going to be able to actually follow and conform to that ideology. And last thing, so they've also stated that parents might push for relationships, but I want to say that even if parents don't push for relationships, right, team opposition can't assume they're going to be more positive relationships because between the child and parent, right? Because one of these children genuinely do want to have relationships, one of them they genuinely do like someone. And I've already stated in my first speaker, if these parents conflict their perspectives with their children, then therefore it's going to be create a more volatile and undermine the trust between these parents and children compared to the status quo, right? For example, a supportive household where these ideologies are not being imposed onto children and we let them have the freedom of choice. So this is why we should be so we should be taking away at the end of our practical clash. Number 1, it doesn't really protect children's sense of self-worth, and instead it rather harms them and completely hinders them from making these positive relationships that can be really beneficial for these children. And number 2 should be taking away that it's actually going to create a more create more harm for these people because they have a lack of this romantical figure that they might want to conceive in. And now quickly, I just want to quickly point out on the principal clash that opposition has not really responded to our claim about freedom of choice is undermined by these sort of ideologies from birth, right? Team opposition has not really effectively responded to our claim by saying that freedom of choice for these children is undermined, not in a direct way, but in general way. Because these children are, we've already stated in that characterization, that these children are in a very malleable position or state within their life. And therefore, any heavy ideologies imposed on the children are going to be most likely adopted and possessed by the children. And therefore, it makes it hard for children to change their ideologies or change their perspectives, even after leaving the household or, getting independence, right? And therefore, this is really bad because in these households where, ideologies are really heavily imposed, it undermines the child's individual capacity to, number 1, develop opposing ideologies, and number 2, even if we're being charitable and saying that these ideologies can be beneficial, they can be positive, then they're still going to be undermine the relationship with their parents if they do have conflicting ideologies. And thank you. That's why I am proud to negate.
Firstly, onto my first clash. So onto the first clash about whether or not what's better being single in a relationship. They said being single creates real benefits. This is not really the case. It's not really, as being in a relationship creates far more being in a relationship. They said being single can let you do hobbies, right? However, I don't really see the point in this because you can still do hobbies, your hobbies on both sides, whether you are in a relationship or in single. And this is even better if you are in a relationship, because in a relationship, right, your partner, in a good relationship, your partner will accept your hobbies and you will still be able to do it and you can share it with them. They also said that like being in a relationship gives you like less choices and it limits what you can do. But this is also not really true, as especially in a healthy relationship, you can still do anything you want, and you can actually like do it even better now that you are in a relationship with your partner, you can like share your interests and enjoy it better. They also say that like people in these relationships won't be able to have like children. However, they still will, right? I feel like if they are single, there's just zero chance for them to have these children. However, in a relationship, there is still a chance. There is still a chance that some of these people will be able to have children, and they're just more better. They're just better in our world. Now onto the second question about like will these people actually able to find these good relationships and what are the impacts of them, right? Firstly. They stated that like these people can understand better what real romance looks like due to like the parents influencing them as a kid. However, this just really isn't true, as regardless of what parents say, they will still be able to see what a healthy relationship looks like, right? And be able to find one due to things such as they see their friends in healthy relationships, if they see other people walking around in healthy relationships, if they see their parents themselves in a healthy relationship, they'll be able to understand what it looks like and just won't get into one of those relationships. They also said these breakups are really bad, right? And make people feel really bad about themselves. But if parents influence you to be single, it won't be as sad for you and they can like bounce back. This doesn't really make sense as there's no really correlation between whether or not your parents influence you to be single and whether or not you feel sad when you break up. Because on both sides, you will feel really sad and devastated when you break up. Because if you were in a good relationship, right, you actually have loved that person. And so you will feel devastated when they left you, regardless of what they taught you. They also stated that like the final decision for the final decision about whether to stay single or get into a relationship is up to the kids. However, as they themselves have stated in their own speech, right, that this decision will be heavily influenced by parents. And also, as we have said in our characterization, that these children are just very easily influenced by people around them, as their brains aren't fully developed yet, and so they can't really make or form their own independent ideas. And so they would rather like listen and get easily influenced by other people, especially their parents, as they think that like they're their parents, right? They trust them. They also they also have said that like these children can still make their own decisions and choices. And they gave the example of these children being rebellious. This is just really a horrible point for them, as I feel like if these children were to be getting into relationships due to them being rebellious, they will be getting into like a really horrible relationship, right? Because the reason why they're in these relationships will be to rebel against their parents, meaning they won't really care whether or not it's a good relationship, and they might not even like the other person. They only care about this relationship to rebel against their parents, and it's just even worse for their side. Because if they are doing this, right, to rebel against their parents, they want to make their parents angry, they're gonna find like bad people to be in a relationship with, as this will like make their parents even worse. So they can make them rebel better. I mean, they're just gonna be put in way worse, way more toxic relationships than outside. So it's just far worse for them. They also said there'll be disagreements with who you marry, right? For instance, this is true. I've stated before in my speech that there will be conflicts between parents and kids on both worlds. However, there are far more conflicts in their world, as in their world, they will not only argue about like who you marry, but just marriage in general. Anyone you marry, they will have conflicts because they don't think you should be married. So with that, I'm proud to oppose.
So this debate has been about one fundamental question, like what future do we want for our children? Do you want them to live in this type of like life like bound in society's expectation, or do we want them to live a life where they can make their own choices of partner like based on their own values? So the opposition today has presented a very like emotional case in ways. So like, oh, they fear this type of loneliness, they fear isolation, they fear like their children being left out, they fear their children will become less socialized. But as the reply today, I'll tell you that those fears are one misplaced and also why the proposition should take this debate overall. So, 7 reasons. Number one, the opposition's entire case, it rests on this like deeply flawed like this assumption that like a romantic relationship is essential for this type of fulfilling and an isolated social life. So they have framed singlehood as like a state of lack, like a problem to be like solved, or just like this sad default, right? And however, proposition, we have already shown that by raising a child to prefer being single, we are not denying them this type of love, we are just expanding their view of what this love looks like. And the opposition have failed to engage with this because they keep painting this type of like picture of like a lonely, isolated single person with not a lot of friends, and a characterization that actually ignores like many happy and also thriving like single people in the world today. And secondly, and this is where the opposition case like collapses like entirely, basically. So they argue that like raising a child to prefer singlehood would prevent them from forming like better relationships, right? But our team has already proven the exact opposite, because we have shown you that a person who is actually happy alone is a person who actually like gets to choose relationships for the right reasons and not go into and don't enter relationships out of desperation or societal pressure. And they enter them because they actually want to, because the other person actually genuinely adds value to their already like to their life already. So the opposition has also not addressed this point, and they have not, because they have not explained why a desperate person is like a better partner and than like a secure and independent one. And thirdly, the opposition has tried to argue that you can't influence your children to be single. But like my third speaker already stated, if a parent can raise a child to value like, I don't know, like financial security, like kindness, or to be like married, then why can they not raise a child to value their like own type of like independence? Why can't they raise them to prefer and not ban, right? Prefer being single. And the opposition has no answer to this. And fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, our approach is not like forcing them to just become single. Like we are raising them to prefer, to see as like valid and even like maybe desirable, right? And if they do later, if they do choose to go into a relationship, then they can do so. We're not going to stop them, except they're not going to go into that relationship out of need, right? The opposition's approach, however, it just like pressures the children to like believing that they must find a partner to be like, I don't know, like complete. And fifthly, they are contradicting themselves, because their third speaker said that, oh, they don't believe that all children want marriage. But then we hear from their first speaker that, oh, they claim it to be like, they claim that like all children want marriage. Like, and they have also failed to explain why on our side people can't have healthy relationships. And lastly, they also keep saying they're better, but at the end of the day they haven't really fulfilled their burden completely, because they can't prove why relationships just suddenly doesn't exist on our side, or like they haven't addressed how we have relationships on our side too. And so in conclusion, Josh, this debate isn't about like forcing our like these children to be lonely, right? It's more about like telling them that their worth, it's not determined by like their relationship status or by how other people see them, and it is about equipping them like what like with that type of independence, and whether that includes a relationship or not. So for all these reasons, proposition. Thank you.